Last year, one of my absolute favorite ham radio YouTubers, Josh Nass of the Ham Radio Crash Course, did an interview with a firefighter who used a Bofang radio to call in a helicopter on a major car crash with a severely injured patient. Check out this clip.
The ambulance supervisor, or the ambulance that was there, the ground ambulance, had a supervisor, and I asked if hey man, you got a VHF programmed radio? And to my surprise, he did. And he went back to his ambulance and he grabbed a Baofeng UV5R.
Baofeng to the rescue.
I hope you all caught that it wasn't the firefighter who had the radio, but in fact the ambulance operator. But this illustrates an important issue in public safety, and that is the dire importance of interoperability. If you don't have the ability to communicate with all of the other agencies that you work with, and in this case the helicopter service, then you are not doing your job effectively. And so I want to talk today about this situation and how the use of amateur radio equipment in public safety is a lot more common than you think. All of my statements today are going to be made through the lens of the absolute immutable fact that properly functioning radio equipment is critical safety equipment. If you don't have a properly functioning radio or a way to carry that radio without dropping it on the ground or losing it, then you don't have the required tools to do your job.
Get on the ground.
I'm not sitting on
Get on the ground.
ground.
Thank you, sir. Can you get my radio out of the street there so it doesn't get run over? Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
So if you are working in administration for public safety and you are allowing your people to either do their job without radio comms, which they may need to call for help, call for additional resources that, the patient would need. If you are allowing broken equipment to go out in the field, you're not doing your job. You are not fulfilling your obligations to your people, and you're wrong, and you need to fix yourself. So the very first time I had to use my amateur radio equipment in public safety, I was working for a place, this was years ago, and that place at that time had really no regard for ensuring that the people had properly functioning radio comms out in the field. And so we had large radios. They didn't have clips, so you couldn't affix it to a pocket, or they didn't have holsters you could put on your belt. And then oftentimes the antennas would be bent and angulated, and sometimes like the wire coil would be exposed, which is dangerous. You could burn yourself on that. Maybe it wouldn't be a bad burn, but still, like, why would you send your people out in the field with that type of equipment? And so I was faced with having to throw a radio in a pocket roughly the size and weight of this, or bring my own. This is my very first radio ever. It's a Bofang UV82, I believe. And it's been cannibalized for parts now. The screen's broken and it just doesn't work anymore. So this is what I carried. I had a clip on it at the time. And it was light enough. It didn't pull my pants down. I was able to talk on it. I could bring a larger, higher gain antenna with me in my backpack if I needed to reach out, if I was in a real tough spot. And this worked. And I was able to continue doing my job safely. This is not a piece of commercial equipment, as you know already. But I had a job to do. I had my safety and my crew's safety to look out for, and the patient's safety. If I needed to call in resources for that patient, I couldn't do it if I had to leave my radio back in the truck because I had no way to carry it, or if the antenna was just malfunctioning and compromised. So I made sure I had the proper safety equipment to do my job. And maybe you look at this video and say I was wrong, and whatever. I made sure that I had the equipment that I needed to do my job safely. This wasn't an ideal solution, but it was a solution. And of course, I let my admin know multiple times, and they just didn't care. They didn't care to go get me the proper equipment to do my job. Another time I had to use my amateur radio equipment in public service was on a wildland fire. And when we go to these wildland fire incidents, the incident is supposed to provide a Bendix King radio for us. Their commercial radio that they use the Bendix King brand. And that's just the way it works, right? We aren't contracted to provide our own radio equipment. We have our own radio equipment, but it wouldn't be compatible with their programming stuff. So the incident provides that to us, and then they will reprogram it anytime there's a frequency change or whatever. And even on small fires, I've never had an issue with this. But on this fire, it was a big fire, and they had no comms set up at all. And I just can't wrap my brain around that. So they were going to send us out into the field. In fact, they did. They sent us out into the field with no comms. I have no idea what they were even thinking in terms of how they would notify us if there was an emergency we needed to respond to. But that's the situation we were in. So my partner and I, we were amateur radio licensees, and we had our ham radio equipment with us. So I always bring a ham radio for, not only something to do, but sometimes I'm able to call home on it if I'm in a place where I don't have cell service, if I'm where I have coverage within the North Idaho repeater group system, or sometimes if I'm close enough, I'll be able to hook up my digital system and reach home that way. So we just hand jammed the ICS 205 form into our amateur radio stuff. I think it was this radio here, this Radio Oddity GS5B, right? And so there again, this is not a commercial piece of equipment. But what was I supposed to do? Should I have refused the assignment? Should I have sat in my tent and refused to go out? There's a sawyer got annihilated by a tree that fell on him that year. Should I have just refused to go do the job and refused to provide medical service to that guy? Should I have gone home? Should I have taken my crew and turned around and gone home and lost out on $10,000 plus worth of work for each of us? That's a no-go. So we were sent out into the field without the equipment needed to do our job safely. And so we made it right. We made it safe. And the other aspect of that I want to touch on is the prohibition by the FCC on field programmability of commercial radios is absolutely crippling on the fire service. And if you take a look at this regulation here, it literally says you're not allowed to program your own radio in the field. I'm assuming that they are trying to look out for agencies and prevent little tiny programming errors that could cause problems. But are we all going to pretend that the knife trick doesn't exist?
You want to short the back 2 pins, the upper and lower.
I'm aware that people from the FCC could be watching this. I'm aware that what I did was not properly within the regulations of the Part 90 code. But I really hope, rather than look at this and condemn what we had to do the job, I hope you perhaps instead look at your regulations and see that some of this stuff is just not compatible with public safety work. You're crippling our ability to do our job in the field. One other time I had to use amateur radio equipment in my service was on a Renaissance fair that I was sent out. I didn't even know I was going to a Ren Fair that day. I was sent out with my crew to go serve this Ren Fair. Ren Fairs are dangerous. They do jousting. They have saber contests, even though they wear safety equipment. I went to one at one point. I think it was last year's. This guy got beamed in the head by a sword, like, they're dull swords or whatever, but he gets smacked. It's a club, right? It's a big iron club. Smacked in the head, even through his helmet. The dude had to go to the sideline, throw his helmet off, and puke everywhere. He had a head injury. Dude absolutely got concussed. So these are dangerous places. So, of course, we were there to help mitigate some of that risk for the participants and the spectators. We were not given any sort of communications equipment that was compatible with with the crews there who were actually administering this fair. So they were using like FRS 11 or something like that. I can't remember. It was an FRS frequency, and they didn't have an extra FRS radio for us. We, of course, didn't have FRS radios for us because we had no idea we were going to do this assignment or what they were using for communications. And in fact, our admin apparently never asked that question either. Okay, it was a simple slip up, but we still had to provide a service there. So I took out my Radio Oddity GS5B out of my backpack, and there's a Bluetooth app for your phone that you can use to program it. And I just plugged in the frequency. I looked it up and plugged in the frequency for FRS 11 or whichever frequency they were using. And I scanned. I listened. I didn't transmit. We didn't actually have to go provide any services. However, that was how they were going to let us know that there was an emergency. Now, I suspect, and this is what the principle I was operating under, after they alerted me that there is an emergency, I'm not then bound by the specific regulations on power limits and non-removable antennas and stuff. So I was planning to then operate and communicate back to them under that doctrine. But there are a lot of backcountry adventurers who might bring FRS radios with them into the field, and so I could see how having a good radio with a good antenna programmed with those frequencies to be able to reach out to those folks in a dire emergency, if maybe they can get out is a little Garmin in reach signal or something, Well, I still need to communicate with them as I get closer and try to figure out where they are and coordinate our rendezvous. I still need to figure out how to talk with them. And so I could see how having something like that would be beneficial. And it's just not feasible to have 5 different radios with all sorts of different stuff in it for this type of urgent emergency situation. That is not a typical use of a radio. And so having a Chinese radio or something like that's open and can be programmed with some of those frequencies that backcountry adventurers might use, I could see how that could actually be really useful. So those are just 3 times that I personally have had to use amateur radio equipment. If you are watching this and you're about to comment that I broke the law and I need to be thrown into prison, okay, how about instead you focus that energy, that really passionate energy, instead of yelling at me about it, maybe talk to your congressman about leaning on some of these FCC administrators to help us do our jobs. Help me help you, please. Thank you for watching.